All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tracking down an epic, continent-crossing story of a man whose legacy literally outlasted empires. We're weaving together the towering might of the ancient Persian Empire, the really intense theological fractures of the Roman world, and the quiet sands of an Egyptian town. It's a story packed with brutal persecution, miraculous relics, and a journey that totally defies geography.
Think about St. James for a second. He wasn't just an everyday citizen. He was a serious VIP, a high-ranking nobleman, basically third in command under the Persian king Yazdegerd I. He was this elite courtier in Babylon, deeply trusted, signing off on official documents for the king and living a life of immense wealth and privilege. Yet somehow, he becomes one of history's most famously dismembered martyrs.
So, you gotta wonder, right? How does that happen? How does a Persian nobleman, executed by his own king in the heart of Babylon, end up buried thousands of miles away in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt? I mean, how does he become a beloved local saint there? The answer is this wild sequence of political intrigue, absolute unwavering faith, and some incredibly daring escapes.
Section 1. Crisis in the Court. Faith versus Empire.
To figure this puzzle out, we have to rewind a bit back to the royal court of the Persian Empire. It was basically a high-stakes pressure cooker. On one hand, you had the Persian state religion, which demanded everyone worship the sun, moon, fire, and water. On the other hand, you had Christianity, or the Nazarenes, as they were called, who were fiercely monotheistic and constantly persecuted by the state. Now James, he was actually raised Christian, but, to keep his massive wealth, his comfortable youth, and the king's favor, he caved. He initially abandoned his faith for the state religion, choosing the cushy court life over the really dangerous path of a Nazarene.
But then, he gets a letter. And not just any letter, an absolutely blistering one from his own mother and his wife. Once they heard he had renounced his faith just to keep the king happy, they wrote to him basically threatening to disown him entirely if he didn't repent right then and there. They bluntly reminded him that the king he was trying so hard to please was just mortal, while the spiritual consequences of what he was doing, those were eternal.
Man, that letter hit him like a ton of bricks. Struck with this immense, crushing grief, James had a massive awakening. He immediately went into his tent, read the Christian scriptures, and just totally withdrew from the king's service. And when they dragged him in to explain himself, he didn't hold back. He openly confessed to being a Christian. He flat out refused the king's direct command to worship the sun and fire. Obviously, this infuriated King Yazdegerd, who saw this not just as some religious phase, but as a deep, humiliating, personal, and political betrayal from one of his most trusted guys.
Section 2. The Dismembered Martyr. A brutal execution.
Yeah, so King Yazdegerd didn't take that betrayal lightly. He wanted to make a terrifying, public spectacle out of James. The punishments escalated so fast. First, he was beaten with thorny rods until he bled. Then, nailed upside down and shot at with arrows. Interestingly, the text mentions a miracle, where the arrows just hung suspended in the air and missed him completely, which, of course, only made the king even angrier. Finally, the king issues this absolutely horrifying decree. James was to be systematically dismembered, piece by piece while completely conscious. The records are specific, cut into exactly 32 pieces.
Now, what happens next is just a staggering testament to psychological resilience. It perfectly captures that historical mindset of martyrdom. When they sever his very first thumb, James doesn't cry out in despair. Instead, he compares his body to a blossoming vine. He actually argues that just like a vintner prunes a vine so it can grow and bear more fruit, chopping up his physical body is only going to yield greater spiritual growth. In late antiquity, folks often viewed physical destruction like this as the ultimate spiritual victory.
And he actually keeps this up. With almost every piece they cut, James fires back with a theological defense. Like when they cut off his 10th digit, he brings up the Greek letter iota. See, iota represents the number 10, and it happens to be the first letter of the name Jesus in Greek. He uses that numeric coincidence to turn his literal torture into a profound theological flex. He stayed completely composed, totally bewildering his executioners.
Okay, it's a pretty macabre scene for sure. From morning all the way until the 9th hour, the dismemberment kept going until literally only his head, chest, and belly were left intact on the ground. But even then, James just kept praying for the world, for the church, and for peace, right up to his very last breath before he was finally beheaded on November 23rd, which is Hathor 27 in the Coptic calendar.
Section 3. Journey of the Relics. Smuggling a Saint. So here's the million-dollar question. How do those 32 scattered pieces make it out of Babylon? It kicks off this frantic, centuries-long geopolitical scramble. First, James's family managed to bury him and build a martyrdom, or a shrine, right there in Persia. But that didn't last. The Persian king soon ordered all Christian shrines destroyed and the bodies burned. To save the relics, believers actually disguised themselves as Persian magi, stuffed the bones into bags, and smuggled them on a grueling 40-day journey to Jerusalem. But the drama doesn't end there, because theological schisms over in the Roman Empire were about to force those bones to move all over again. Enter a guy named Peter the Iberian, really fascinating historical figure. He was a bishop down in Gaza and an anti-Chalcedonian, which basically means he disagreed with the mainstream Roman Church about the nature of Christ. That put him squarely on the bad side of Emperor Marcian's strict new decrees. Facing intense persecution himself, Peter packed James' bones into a silver casket and bolted from Jerusalem to Alexandria, Egypt, just looking for a safe haven.
Which brings us to Section 4, a shrine in Oxyrhynchus, the final resting place.
All right, so this brings us to the final leg of our geographic mystery, a small town in Middle Egypt, known in Coptic as Pemji and in Greek as Oxyrhynchus. Now, Peter the Iberian was actually packing up, planning to leave Egypt and head back to Palestine. But right as he's about to leave, the texts say he gets a vision from St. James himself. The martyr explicitly tells Peter, "Nope, don't go to Palestine, take my bones to Pemji." And according to the source, this actually fulfilled a prophecy Christ made to James right before his execution, promising that his body would ultimately rest and be venerated down in Egypt.
Let's pause and define why this is such a big deal culturally. Setting up a martorion, or a topos, wasn't just about finding a graveyard for old bones. It was about creating a total cultural powerhouse. For the local Copts in Pemji, having the relics of this famous foreign saint in their town gave them massive spiritual support. It gave them a localized religious identity and a huge communal gathering space that really strengthened the whole town's social fabric.
And the legacy this shrine left in Egypt? Absolutely profound. When Peter got to Pemje, he was welcomed with open arms by a wealthy, hospitable local guy named Moses. And here's our funny twist. Peter actually tried to take the body back with him to Gaza later on. But the texts say he was miraculously stopped dead in his tracks on the riverbank. The relics stubbornly refused to leave. So the shrine became a permanent fixture, beautifully intertwining the epic story of a high-ranking Persian courtier with the everyday lives of Egyptian farmers and monks. He became the permanent protector of Pemje.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this incredible continent-spanning journey. How is it that the absolute decrees of a mighty Persian king and later the strict edicts of a powerful Roman emperor totally failed to contain the legacy of just one single steadfast guy? It's kind of wild to consider how borders, kings, and entire empires are so easily outlasted by the enduring power of history, text, and faith. It's a pretty solid reminder that sometimes the most lasting monuments aren't built by empires at all. They're built by the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the history around you.